Good evening, everyone. I'm Sally Warhaft. Welcome to the Fifth Estate. It's great to be back. We had a little break for our Melbourne Writers' Festival, so it's terrific to see you all here again on this cold Melbourne night. We're here tonight to butter up our minds, to inquire about our obsession with food in a world where many millions don't get enough to eat, in a country where we're quick to be outraged at the maltreatment of cattle for export and the prospect of super trawlers in our oceans, but slow to connect these activities and our moral indignation with those who go hungry. To talk about this tonight and our kind of obsession with food here, I've got three really interesting and very different guests. Richard Cornish is a senior writer for The Age, Epicure and Sydney Morning Herald Good Living. He has co-written books on Spanish and Mexican food. He's a well-known judge and consultant for various awards and festivals, and he was cast as a commentator on Iron Chef Australia. Maria Tumarkin is an author and cultural historian, and her books include Traumascapes, Courage and Other Land. But she's also the author of an essay that I read recently in Kill Your Darlings called Sublime and Profane, Our Contemporary Obsession with Food. And Andrew Hewett is Executive Director of Oxfam Australia. He's also Vice President of the Australian Council for International Development and co-chair of the Make Poverty History campaign. He's a member of the BHP Forum for Corporate Responsibility, and he has just returned in his role for Oxfam from a trip to Africa. So please welcome our guests. This came about, this session tonight, because I've been thinking a lot, and I'm sure you all have too, about our obsession with food. It seems to me that it's become out of control, and on any given day you can open up your newspaper and see some new narcissistic or just plain weird thing about food, and that's if you don't live near an eat street or groovy kind of food central district, or if you don't watch MasterChef or one of the many other television programs that we have about food. Just this afternoon I opened up one of our broadsheets online, and this is the kind of thing that, you know, is just becoming sort of continual. Just this afternoon. It's called Saving the Best Till Last, and it's a review of our top 10 desserts in this city. Here's just a couple of them. Pancakes at Circa, fitting the Pacific Rim brief, whatever that is. Paul Wilson does Korean-style pancakes made with almond milk, fills them with apple and finishes them with a bold splash of Calvados sauce and buttermilk ice cream, at once familiar and surprising. Panna cotta at Albert Street Food and Wine. Philippa Sibley makes panna cotta sexy again with this gloriously silken rendition with truffled honey, salted and caramelised cashews and a biscuit base. And my favourite, Plight of the Bees from Attica. It comes in a miniature wooden beehive box that opens to reveal a honeycomb lattice pattern and a layered confection of alluring intricacy. Try to guess the ingredients and you're bound to fall short. Yes, there's honey, but it's made by aphids, not bees. And honeydew melon and frozen granita, perhaps peach. In between, you'll find avocado custard and pumpkin honeycomb. There's cool crunch, ice and velvety smoothness. And every mouthful tastes more extraordinary than the last. Richard, do we have a cultural eating disorder?
I do, personally. A cultural eating disorder. Every culture I've been to will discuss food on a daily basis. Food has come to us late in Australia. We do not have a food culture, and we haven't had one until recently. We arrived here with tin food and sacks of flour. We didn't relate to the land. We brought everything with us. We took every meal on a horseback with us when we started colonising this country. we haven't had a relationship where we've had a culture and a language around food. You go to other countries, so you walk down the street in Spain, go to Seville, and people will be talking about, if two blokes were walking down the street, what are they talking about football? No, they'll be saying, I actually prefer hake. No, to me, I prefer mackerel. I like the oiliness of it. Oh, no, I like the bit just behind the cheeks. But how do you do it? My mother made it this way. The conversation trails off. Those conversations you will find in every country where you've had a relationship with the land and the sea, and where people have farmed and fished and hunted. We don't have that culture in Australia, so it's new. We've got this new language, but we don't know how to use it properly. It doesn't have any context. It just floats around our heads. And perhaps our cultural obsession with food is that it's new, it's novel, but it's not seated anywhere. It just floats around. It's like a new toy to play with. It doesn't come from the land or the sea or tradition or from a place that is real.
Maria, the original meaning of gluttony is not to actually stuff yourself, but it's to be excessively interested in food, to think about it, a misplaced desire for food, and a withholding from the needy are other definitions of it, anticipation of meals, and seeking after sources. And it isn't just to stuff your mouth, as I always thought it was. Are we gluttonous, and have we gone too far in thinking about food in a culture of such wealth of food?
I think so, yes. What really concerns me, so I think, no one here is interested in food culture bashing. I think we all love food, we love people who love food. Food is glorious, life-giving, sustaining, beautiful, a window to other cultures, etc., etc. So there's no question there. To me, it's about exactly that, the excessive interest, the cultural dominance of food. So, you're talking about, the age, yeah?
I didn't name it.
I did. I'm interested in why every time we open Saturday Age now, the Life and Style supplement, and I should say Saturday Age in general, may it live long and prosper. But why is it that we have to struggle through articles on artisan salt and gastropubs to get to movies and books and features? And it feels normal now, but even a couple of years ago, it wasn't like that at all. And somehow it has become very quickly normalised. In 2010, 2011, best-selling books in Australia, 2010 is Julie Goodwin's My Family Table. She was the MasterChef winner. Last year, Jamie Oliver's 30-Minute Meals. Now, we know that a food book is not going to be the best-selling book of 2012. We know what is going to be the best-selling book of 2012, and it offers us very little consolation, I'm afraid. But it took something like 50 Shades of Grey to kind of really challenge the dominance of food books.
It's going to be 50 Shades of Custard next week, don't worry.
Yes, I'm sure we will catch up. People are writing gastro-memoirs. They take gastro-tours. They get off on gastro-porn. People engage gastro-criticism. So there is this incredible saturation and dominance of one cultural form, and there is nothing wrong with the celebration and appreciation of food and engagement with food. It's just that there is so much of it. And on my shopping strip in Elsternwick, I'm just naming things, Elsternwick, the Age, I'm just, every time a shop closes, it's a shoe shop, it's a flower shop, it's it's male clothing shop.
Dimmick's closed.
Dimmick's closed, yes. It's always an eating place. It's always a food place that springs up in its place. As if there is nothing else that could possibly prosper in this world. No other business that can succeed now, only a food-related business. So, and I know and all kinds of people who sell shoes, who sell flowers, who sell books, they've had diabolical couple of years. Our farmers, we know what kind of time they've been having. So the context for that in Australia alone is really alarming. And then we go and sort of introduce the global context, and then it becomes really something kind of monstrous or getting there.
I'll come to you in a moment, Andrew, but I just want to pick up on something Maria said, that, you know, you've got to get through the food section to get to the reviews, but actually then you get to the reviews and they're reviews of cookbooks, and then you go to the travel section and it's how to do a foodie tour, and it's, I mean, it's right through it. And this has happened very, very quickly. Richard, this is your area of work. It used to just be epicure. How did this happen?
I was a television producer and I saw this happening. I've actually changed from making television into writing for food because I was watching what was happening overseas, having lived in the UK and watching how media trends work. And it happened because what we're seeing now is a media trend, not saying us as consumers, but actually the producers and owners of media are the ones who they create the content. And there's been increasingly so more supplements, starting with the UK, the more supplements on the weekend, Observer Food Monthly, through The Guardian, Lift Outs in the Times, and equivalents in New York, the two powerhouses of media and words globally. They started wheeling this out, pushing it out, because bit by bit people were closing down their lives, focusing on where they are in their lives, which is at the home, in the home front. We're talking 1990s here. We're talking after Thatcher, after Reaganism. People are really becoming selfish and self-obsessed. And we're looking at this having roots in politics and in the global zeitgeist in the Western world. And so so it becomes a safe place where you can explore cornucopia, where you can explore beauty, where you can explore ideas through food. And this is then presented in magazines, in books, and then television gets on, started creating this, moving across from those magazine formats to television formats. And then we're seeing reality TV occurred at the same time, so reality TV cooking show formats happen at the same time. So these are all just, they're abstract ideas that have come about from a shift in the way we live. And that's a deconstructionist way of looking at it, but I saw it and I thought, well, I want to do, if I'm going to do something, I want to do it really well, and perhaps do something that changes the way people think of this. So we're not just producing crap, absolute rubbish, but actually looking about where food comes from, how it affects people, and how it affects our lives, and perhaps even, and now moving into the health as well.
Andrew, what do you make of it all? You've just got back from Africa and you're at the cutting edge of food necessity in your work, but you live in this culture. What do you feel when you come back from a trip like you've just come back from?
Well, maybe to pick up a comment that Richard made, is food is central to most people's lives. But places I've frequently visited and where Oxfam works, it's absolutely central. It's very mundane. It's actually about survival. And the choices of food are pretty limited. We're talking, well, we've got plenty of food here. The reality is something like 1 in 7 of the world's population go hungry every night. Literally don't have enough food to eat of any kind, let alone some of the recipes that you outlined earlier on. So there's a disconnect between the obsessions here in Australia and elsewhere, and how 14% of the world's population are living. And we have another reality is that we produce enough food for everyone to have enough food to eat. It's not a question about that there's not enough food being produced. We just don't have a food system that's working effectively. We don't have a trading system which ensures that people are getting food at the right sort of prices. When we don't have overseas aid policies focused on food production and agricultural development. So there's a real disconnect between some of our obsessions here. And I share some of the obsessions. I like the good food and I like good restaurants and the like. But I think we really have gone over the top in some of the things some of the ways we go about it here in Australia.
People obviously think about these issues. I mean, you can be indulging, I suppose, in our food culture every day of the week and be worrying and thinking about others, but there are movements that have popped up, like local food. This idea that all the food you source should be within whatever 10 kilometres, 100 kilometres, so on. All sorts of myths around this, and perhaps interesting reasons why people choose to do it. Peter Singer asked, the question, if you have $1 to spend on beans, and you can choose between buying locally grown beans at a farmer's market that will probably make you feel good and that you're part of a community in doing that and not using miles for travel and your climate footprint and so on. You can buy them at the farmer's market, or you could buy the beans grown by a poor farmer in Kenya. Even if the local farmer would get the entire dollar and the African farmer would get only 2 cents in the dollar, you'll do more to relieve poverty by buying the Kenyan bean. Now, from this perspective, things like the local food movement look pretty poorly judged. Richard, what do you make of these kind of popular movements where I think people's intentions are very good?
I reckon we're all battery humans now. We all live in, 95% of us live in some sort of urban environment. Even if we're living in rural communities, we're still living on concrete. We don't have our hands in the earth. I grew up, we killed cows, we milked the ones we didn't kill, or the other way around. We grew our own vegetables. We weren't poor, but I look back now and we probably would be considered that because we grew a lot of the stuff we ate. We got coffee from International Roast, which I believe is in some country on the Guinea coast somewhere. We were locavores. We had to because we didn't. There's not a lot of money around when you're a dirt poor dairy farmer. I've got good teeth. That's the benefit. But when we're making those choices, we're rich, we're wealthy. We don't grow our own food. We get our money through the capitalist system. We've got money in our pocket. We've got to make those choices every day. I do not know how to get African beans. I know how to get them. I know where the food comes from in Australia. I actually don't think we import African beans. I think Peter Singer was writing that for an international audience. The decisions I make, I've been trained within my family, the way I grew up, and in my business culture is to look after people locally, and if you look after people locally, they look after you, and that's why I've been trained and brought up. So I will buy food from someone who I know and who I support. And at Elsternwick, I used to live in Elsternwick, and my wife's a fashion designer, and we used to we always would sell the clothes to the shops that are no longer there, and because they would we'd sell to them, and then someone else would buy from them, and then the money was going back into our pockets in our small community. I don't know how to do that anymore. It's pretty hard. I don't know how to support an African farmer. I don't know how to.
Well, I think there are a number of things that can be done to support African farmers, and particularly when you're talking about the people who are going hungry. 80% of the people who are going hungry are actually food producers themselves. They suffer from a lack of investment, a lack of support. They don't have access to the tools, the seeds. They don't have access to transport to get their goods to market so that they can, let alone getting it across the oceans to a place like Australia. If we focused our attention on using our overseas aid programs, for instance, on supporting women farmers in particular, because again, 80% of those who are hungry may be food producers, and most of them are women. If we focused our efforts on them, then that's a shortcut to actually helping people find a way out of hunger. Yes, I think there's some other arguments about whether you'd support buying African. When I lived in Britain, it was Kenyan peas and beans. That's which always sounds somewhat bizarre that they were being sent so far. I think there are some arguments there, and climate change starts to kick in as a real argument. I think what we've also got used to, and this is part of the way our food consumption, I think, has gone off track. We've got used to things being available year in, year out. We've lost the concept of seasons, which is just, I think it's a tragedy. I'm used to this time of the year, it's pears on the kitchen table, but we're used to having them all the time. And we need to think again about what our expectations are. We need to think again about how we treat food. One of the things which I think is a great tragedy is the amount of wastage in food. It's been calculated in Australia something like $5 billion worth of food is wasted every year.
40%. It's 40% from farm gate.
Yeah.
40% is wasted either in farm gate in loss, in not being suitable for the market, in production, in transport, in marketing, in use by dates when it's processed, and then in the home. 40% is wasted.
Most of it in a country like Australia is wasted at the point of consumption. Most of the wastage that occurs in a developing country is wasted at the point of production, because they don't have the storage facilities and they don't have the transportation facilities.
Mice and beetles. Mice and beetles.
Yeah, exactly.
So people are starving because they can't have proper silos.
Yep.
Okay.
If we didn't waste 40% of our food, where we do have transport infrastructure and refrigerators and everything else, would that make a difference in Africa?
Well, not directly, and I think it's a difficult argument. We've got to highlight, I think, that there is an incredible wastage here, but I think that's not going to make a difference in where hunger is going to take place.
That's
I think it
terrible,
does.
Isn't it?
But I think it is about changing mindsets. And I think that's fairly critical. If we can have a different approach to food in a place like Australia, I think that then starts to play out in what our government does, what our expectations about food production and the like in those places where hunger still takes a hold.
Can a mindset, though, change other people's lives, Maria? What do you think? Just a changing mindset, can it feed the hungry?
Yeah, I wonder about that. Focusing on solution, changing people's mindsets, changing culture. All of these things, very noble, but they are slogans. I don't know. I'm sure when Andrew says them, they're not slogans, but when they're taken up in the broader culture, they are. I wanted to make just a very quick point about the consumption of beans, the right kind of beans. I think philosopher Zizek, whatever you make of him, he makes a really good point about this Western idea of redemption through consumption. So somehow by consuming the right, by drinking fair trade coffee, somehow you morally purify yourself, or somehow you become a different and an enlightened person in some ways, or redeem your sins of being born in a rich country and being part of this 40% of wastage. And I think to me that's a really a very unappealing argument, an unappealing narrative, that somehow if we're just consuming the right kinds of things, that somehow we are doing sufficient amount of things and somehow we're engaging with the world.
Is it unappealing though because there's truth in it too?
I think it's unappealing because there is so much that is untrue about it, and so much that is seductive, so much that is easy. It gets us off the hook. We continue, it perpetuates the obsession with food. It's just, you're obsessed with the right kind of food. So when you think about the abundance of food in Australia, for instance, the kind of cultural prominence and that 40% figure, you have to start asking, what on earth is going on here? I mean, these things need to be kind of brought together, and this idea also of consuming your way to some kind of morally pure or purer position, I think that's really suspect.
But I don't think... Oxfam is probably one of the largest sellers of fair trade goods in Australia. I don't see buying fair trade coffee or tea or the like as finding a way to some kind of morally pure state. It is actually making a practical contribution to people. I've seen some of the benefits of fair trade production and the fair trade chain of production. People's lives have been transformed. There have been plenty of studies which have demonstrated that. So I think for sure if it's painted as a way to some kind of purity, then I think that's wrong. But I don't think we don't market it that way, nor do any other fair trade producers that I've seen. It's not been put in those sort of terms.
Richard, what do you make of that? Do people, do you think, feel good when they do the right thing, or is it a more pure consumption?
We used to go on Sunday mornings to a place where we'd get redeemed by consuming little biscuits and a glass of wine. And there's a man in a coat and a collar around his neck used to give it to us. We used to feel good after that. I think you can extrapolate that into a theory. And when I buy coffee, if I've got a choice to buy coffee, I will buy something. Here we go. I'll buy something that is generally. Let's look at Rainforest Alliance. That's grown in a rainforest environment. So they haven't denuded the rainforest, whether there's an over canopy of rainforest, where there's leaf litter on the ground that protects the soil from erosion, where there is biodiversity, and where people are paid a decent amount of money to harvest and process the coffee. That coffee will, if made properly by a proper barista, will taste better than an industrial processed coffee that's made in really, really lean conditions, because of simple thing of the biodiversity. When you have rich soil with plants that are grown properly and not stressed and actually trying to live in their normal genomic process, express themselves as the plant should, when you have good soil and good plants, food tastes better. I think a lot of labelling is bullshit. A lot of organic labelling is crap. A lot of biodynamic labelling is rubbish. But the processes that they undergo, don't believe the marketing. Trust your judgment. I've got a hobby horse. I've got a high horse. Sorry, don't have a hobby horse. I've got a high horse. I've got both, but I get confused between the two. Taste. We have forgotten how to taste, Sally. We have actually forgotten the process of tasting, of understanding that when we put something in our tongue, we're getting salt. We're trying to understand that salt is there because we need salt to live. Without salt, we die. Sugar is energy. We search for sugar because it is hardcore energy in our environment. Primates going out looking for ripe things. We detect bitter because bitterness is going to be alkaloids. Alkaloids are going to poison us, and we detect sourness. Sourness could indicate unripeness, could also indicate fermentation going on as well. We also detect glutamates, your amino acids, umami. We detect those things, and they tell us where we're going to find the building blocks for protein in our body. When we forget to taste, when we simply consume as an act of pleasure, an act of greed, when we're not concentrating, we're not in the moment, we forget to connect with our tongue and our mind and our nose and our brain. We're not being at one with our food, and we forget how to taste, and we don't know what's good and what's bad anymore. We don't know what's crap. We've fed chili and sugar and salt in the form of junk food, and it's just as appealing as a beautifully just underripe apple. Because I think it's too sweet, it's out of balance, you know what I mean? And so our pleasure senses have been corrupted because we haven't been trained. It's not part of our culture. So we don't understand what tastes good and bad anymore. Good food generally will be grown in a way that the soil's been looked after, the environment's been looked after, there will be biodiversity around it, and the people who look after it will generally have high levels of skill because they know how to look after these plants, so they're actually having a rewarding life at the same time. It might sound like a utopia.
Sure does, yeah.
But these are things you find in products that are in food that is well grown, that often has these labels of organic, fair trade, biodynamic, Rainforest Alliance. Generally, I rest my case. Thank you.
Maria, you write about food as being a cultural cipher and a kind of code, and you say that today food is our main entry point into the otherness of culture. In a food-centric universe, we are tacitly assured that difference can be tantalising, not terrifying, that otherness can be savoured, that no matter what, we needn't be afraid of anything. And it struck me that, and when I read it, I remembered a comment by one of the contestants that was on Go Back to Where You Came From recently. I don't know what his name was, but he said this really awful thing about, I really love it when they come and open a couple of restaurants in Sydney, but that's it. I don't want to know about anything else. The rest of them can stay where they are. And that this, you can consume culture. Of course, it's the easiest way to consume another culture is to go to an Afghani restaurant or a Vietnamese restaurant, and I think people, it tracks, doesn't it, in time that, 2 years ago it was cool to eat pho and now it's cool to eat avocado custard, clearly. How does that, tell us more about this sort of, this lens into the otherness of culture.
Well, when I started thinking about, sort of preoccupation with food and what I thought about as our culture that has become very food-centric. Actually, and I don't know if anyone agrees with me, whether it resonates, and I just thought, I bet food is not just about food. And if food is not just about food, what is food about? And I thought, people talk about food, perhaps food is the last universal language we have. Well, music used to be that. And but when you think about that, and when you think about, Africa, when you think about famines, when you think about malnutrition, when you think about chronic food shortages, then what kind of universal language is that? That doesn't feel true at all. But what I think it is in terms of language, I think it is a very culturally specific language with which we are thinking through where we find ourselves, the world we find ourselves, both locally and globally. So I think through food, as through that kind of cultural cipher, we're actually wrestling with a lot of things in the public sphere in a rather oblique way. So I think of, the celebrity chefs who are now more famous than famous rock stars. Yeah, they are the sort of the embodiment of fame now, which is fine. Why shouldn't they be famous? Why should someone else be famous? But I think they are kind of, some of them in particular, and the way that they are framing our debates, they're actually talking about not food. They're talking about what kind of people we are. They're talking about selfhood. They're talking about social solidarities. They're talking what it means to be part of a community, what it means to be part of the world. And to me, I was thinking that in the 70s, travel, the distinction between a tourist and a traveller was a kind of a defining distinction for many people, which was about much more. It's about the kind of the totality of the people that they are. We're not tourists, we don't take tour buses, we travel, we are open, we humbly, tread the otherness of cultures. So I think in a sense, I think food possibly, and what is your relationship with food is doing, and the way it's articulated, I think it's doing a kind of similar work of thinking through identity, both individual and shared identity. And I also think, it's about body. We don't need our bodies anymore much, but with food we do. We need bodies to produce it, we need bodies to consume it. It's a radically embodied act, eating. You can't do it online, you can do pretty much everything else, including sex. So you have to be, and it's a social act as well. So it's a counterforce to much that is happening in our world. So I reckon food is doing a lot of work there. And what you mentioned about otherness of cultures, well, I think, in our world where, we have all these ideas about clash of civilizations and, the way in which cultures are appearing to be more and more incomprehensible to each other and more antagonistic, and tensions are everywhere if you actually bother to consider what's going on. So in a sense, food is one way in which you can enter another culture and enter not into this in the spirit of apprehension, but in the spirit of celebration and union and possibility. So I think there's a great deal that's happening around food, and we need food to think about things, to think about ourselves, to hope, and to make sense of the world. Yeah.
Andrew, I've lived in India for a long time, and which is a place that has experienced terrible food shortages in its past, not as bad, nowhere near as bad these days as somewhere like Africa. But the people that I lived with were very fascinated with our eating. What do you eat? What did your mother cook for you when you were little? And it was a real way into conversation. And I mean, in fact, to them, they lived in a slum in Bombay. They were the fisher people there, and their food was incredible. It was absolutely the best food I've ever eaten anywhere. And when I did describe what we ate, they were appalled at the blandness of it. They couldn't believe it, but intrigued and shocked by the abundance of it. Do people in, you've just come back from
Burkina Faso.
how do people there ever ask you about food here?
No, they didn't. Not on this trip anyway. It was my first visit to Burkina Faso, and it was pretty shocking. It's a poor country, a country I knew little about before I went there. It's a country of about 18 million people, and it's 181 on 187 country index on the Human Development Index.
What did you say it translates to? The land of no corrupt men?
Land of incorruptible men is what Burkina Faso means. But it was much more basic. They were inquiring whether we could help. We've just helping them with some food here and now. My most vivid memory of the trip I had last month was late one afternoon visiting a water point which Oxfam had helped restore with our partner organisation, and we met the local village head, a very tall, dignified man, and he told us that even it was Ramadan, so they were fasting during the day, but once the fast ended, they had no food, literally no food. They had, except for a little bit of cereal, and then, as he described it, leaves off the trees. That's what they had. While we were talking with him, about half a dozen kids came and watched us. We were the biggest show in town, and almost to triangulate, just to check whether he was overstating the case, we asked the kids whether they'd eaten that day. And because they're children, they're not part of the fasting of Ramadan, and none of them had eaten that day. So the quite basic thing about trying to find out what do we eat, no, it was could we help them with some food. And in the best of times in that country, for about when the rains arrive, when everything goes well, they don't have enough food for about 3 or 4 months of the year.
That's when everything's going well.
That's when things are going well. It just doesn't take much to flip it over into a desperate situation. And in that country of 18 million people, about 2 million are going hungry at the moment. And they're part of 18 million people in West Africa.
It's interesting you touch on Ramadan, because it's just made me think, in all the religions I can think of, there are fasting periods. Where to be hungry is part of that connection with the gods or God, and that secular culture just doesn't have it. We just have the diet in a sort of godless world. Is that curious to you, Maria?
Yeah, I mean, there is clearly a way in which food, if you listen to Richard, there is a real when you were on your high horse, and it was a beautiful sight. There's a real sense of the connection between what you were saying and your soul. Yeah, it wasn't your mouth talking; you were talking from some other place. So, I hope I'm not overstating the case here. So clearly, I think for a lot of people there is some kind of spiritual or soulful dimension. So just to take our conversation away from kind of the grotesque dimension of preoccupation with food, that there is for many people a very strong connection with food, and food as a site of beauty and revelation and something else. So, and I respect that. I have a lot of respect for that. So there are some spiritual needs that are being fulfilled by food in our godless world, just in a different way.
But the breaking of the fast is a time for celebration, and the man who I met who only had the leaves off the trees and a bit of cereal, he invited us the following Saturday to attend the breaking of the ending of Ramadan, to have a celebration. God knows what food they were going to have on the table, but it was a celebration. So it emphasises or reinforces your point of just about the cultural significance of food.
And I think the point that you made about the generosity of people who have nothing, and they are the people who will open their house to you and put everything they have on the table, and it's very moving.
Richard, do you ever find that you just think this has gone too far? This is just narcissistic nonsense?
I gave up.
Or are you always able to take it within its context?
I gave up meat in February.
Yes, you did.
I just thought it was bullshit. I thought, this is rubbish, and this it wasn't good anymore. It wasn't enjoyable. It was everywhere. It was our obsession with meat, and it was just.
Is this sort of part of the eat well, not too much, mostly plants?
Oh, no, I just had a really bad steak at a restaurant and they charged me $55 for it, and I thought, this is rubbish. We've forgotten what it is. So yes. I'd just like to touch upon talking about restaurants, what you're talking about before about fasting. I have to review my job. I have to review for newspapers and for Age Good Food Guide. Before I go into a restaurant, I will. When I sit down, I will do what I was brought up to do at the Sunday table. Was I'll actually just put my head nestle my head in my clasped hands for 20 seconds or so, and people think I'm saying grace. I'm not. I'm actually just clearing my head of all the rubbish and the dust from the day, and so I can actually be professional and actually have a clear mind to be able to experience.
Is that all you have to do to clear your mind?
Yeah, I've got an automatic defrag.
I need some lessons, Richard. I'm going to give up meat.
We also do. A mate of mine, Max Allen, and I are really into understanding how our senses of taste and smell work. We do workshops with William Anglis, and we ask people, we send an email the day before they come. There are a few rules. They're not allowed to wear perfume. They have to wash without soap the day before, and they are not to have a large meal beforehand. They
Sounds like the same instructions you get before an anaesthetic.
It's pretty similar. We're pretty dull. The reason we ask people not to eat is because we want a sharpened appetite, because the body behaves incredibly differently when it is not full, it's not processing. There's a whole lot of chemistry and of learned behaviour and of neurology that goes. Your brain, the way you taste, is not just up here, it's not just up in here and here. It's all the way into your gut. You've got taste buds in your gut. You've got more neurons in your gut than you have in your spinal column. So when you use the word gut feeling, it's actually your gut's connected directly to your brain through the nervous system, because there's so much going on there. There's this little chemical factory needing to put enzymes and needing to put acids in there, and it just doesn't happen automatically. It's controlled from up here. We're connected biologically, evolutionary, if you believe that sort of stuff, to our stomach, to our brains, and it actually defines who we are physically, and therefore because it is who we are physically and mentally, it's our very existence is determined by what we eat and how we eat, and therefore why isn't all this culture around food? It's because it's really important to be able to understand all the taboos, all the laws, all the way we cook. That is what a lot of culture is about at a very basic level. Is about food and the seasons come and go, and even in rich country, food is not always available on rich country, rich earth. I'm talking about, and so fasting is really an important part of understanding the food cycles in traditional life, and fasting, therefore fasting is has to be understood and then maintained and have culture around it as well. It's essential.
You wonder about the brain power kind of being lost in one culture that's just stuffing itself so much that there's no room for breath. There's no room, and another where when you're not getting it, when you're hungry, starving, your brain is affected in that way as well. Andrew, is there anything you can think of in our food fetish culture here that could be redirected? I mean, I know it's a long shot. I do understand we're talking about two almost irreconcilable worlds in a way, but is there anything that could be used in it, to be tapped into, that actually could be of real benefit rather than in our hearts and minds?
Well, don't discount the hearts and minds. I think if people in a country like Australia have an appreciation of good food and about where how it lands on the table, that's important, and it can help be a way of building connections with people who don't have enough food or don't have enough food on a regular basis. And I think if we can broaden out the conversation a bit like we have tonight, to broaden it out to think about both Australia and places like Burkina Faso, that's a positive step. If we can think about occasions, World Food Day is coming up in mid-October. We should be thinking that as an opportunity for the sorts of conversations about how we can ensure that the world's food system operates much more efficiently and effectively than what it does at the moment. I think mindset is the first step. Changing one's mindset is the first step to creating a better world. And I think these sorts of conversations, the sorts of conversations around food, around the table, are really important and can lead to practical change. Doesn't guarantee practical change, but can lead it to.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we're not moving further away from it. I don't know, when you've got sort of 7-year-olds watching MasterChef and then getting up the next morning and saying, I want a smoked salmon and cream cheese sandwich with capers for lunch today, Mum. That it's just getting further and further away from a mindset when it could be getting closer.
It could be, and that's the challenge, I think. And clearly some of the stuff, the obscenity of the salmon and cream cheese for breakfast or whatever is something that's got to be challenged. But I think we do need to put the morality back into the conversation and the practicality of actually being able to feed the world's population. But we can use the concern or the obsession with food as a way to begin that conversation. And for me, that's part of trying to achieve the change in policies and practices which are going to be required. Doesn't guarantee it. It's going to be a longest journey. We'll have steps backwards, and probably Junior MasterChef is one of those steps backwards. But I do think there's a possibility of change.
What do you think, Maria?
Yeah, I don't... see, to me, the stuff on television, that's the banal bit. That does not concern me as much.
You've got an Iron Chef next to you, your judge next to you. We're going to have to ask you about that in a moment. But
yes. When, if people remember, when Barry Humphries quite unforgettably was in Q&A and he was asked what became of Lex Patterson, he said, he became a celebrity chef, which I thought was very funny. See, I don't mind that. That's fine. The television, the Junior MasterChef, Dalai Lama visiting the Junior MasterChef and His Highness Dalai Lama, I should say. All of that is okay. It's just that sense of the oxygen, how much oxygen is being taken up by food, and how obviously in a global context, we absolutely need to put morality in the conversation. In the local context, can we please put some humour in the conversation? It's just food, goes in, goes out. It's all the same for everyone. So to me, it feels really weighty and humorless and omnipresent. And I just would like food to be, to be flourishing, and our interest in food to be celebrated, but just to occupy its own place alongside 1,000 other things that we should be engaged with. I do not think it should be at the very centre of our culture. It just does not strike me in the cultural expressions. I'm not talking about food for survival. I'm not talking about food in utilitarian sense. I'm not talking about food in the life and death sense, but food as a kind of all the industry and all the kind of cultural expressions around it. Fantastic, beautiful, but there is a world out there that is rich and enticing and thrilling and important, and just it needs to be allowed back into the culture.
So, Richard, would you like to give up work as well as meat?
Give up working in general?
Yeah.
Oh, God, that'd be good. I've got this vision of just having not too many acres, but just enough so I can have a place where I can grow vegetables and fruit trees and have a few chooks. And yes, I'd like to. I think we all have an agrarian vision somewhere in our head.
Isn't that extraordinary? How many people that is their vision? Not everyone, of course, but a lot of people, isn't it? I just grow my own tomatoes. And does anybody have a question? Just put your hand up if you've got a question. Somebody will come and put a microphone in it.
Andrew, with these chronically malnourished parts of the world, do you think the problem is too many people or not enough food? Or a mixture of both?
Look, clearly population pressures are part of the problem, but the best way to relieve population pressures is to improve the status of women. That's been shown time and time again. In terms of hunger specifically, I think it's about lack of investment. It's about impacts of climate change. It's about a trading system which on a global basis which is out of control. And the fact that a European cow is subsidised to the tune of $2 a day, which is more than what a third of the world's population lives on, shows we have a trading system which is just not prioritising people's basic needs at the heart. So to tackle population, that's one of the great pressures, but improve the status of women, which would have an impact on food production as well. So that there's no one simple lever. We've got to change a whole series of levers to move away from the sort of hunger situation we have at the moment. Can I also just pick up on we've got to remember hunger is not just about over there. Why is it in Australia we have organisations like Second Bite and which are feeding people who do not have enough food in this country? Well, we talked about the obsession for those of us who have the food, that have the money for the obsession to live with. There's a good number of people in Australia who don't have enough food as well, and we shouldn't forget that. They're doing Second Bite. I've been to their warehouse. They're doing a thriving business.
We invited them tonight actually, but they were all at a conference.
They're too busy feeding people. Yeah. I think it's really important then to look at to have a definition of food. You can have calorific food in Melbourne, in areas that do not have people do not have access to fresh fruit and vegetables, and so there is this people can have access to calories, but they don't have access to nutrition. And I think if you can understand that's a pretty easy thing to understand. They can get lots of fast food, but not enough fresh fruit and veg. And then becomes a generation where people actually don't know how to cook fresh fruit and veg, and this is why they've been told they need to have the media to tell them what to do. Can I say, go home, if you've got a grandmother or a mother or some member of the family, stand next to them and cook. Even if they're bad, cook. Learn something from them. If you're learning how not to do something, stand next to them. The only way you can learn to cook is not through your eyes. Food television is bullshit, completely bullshit. I spoke to a guy from Coles the other day, and I said, how'd those sales go after MasterChef the other night? And he said, yeah, they went up for one day. After that, it goes back to normal. People don't learn to cook from watching. You can't. It is food and cooking. Proper food from scratch is actually a ballet, and you have to learn the moves of those ballet by standing next to someone, moving from them, seeing how they work, how they hold their hands, how they move their body, how they touch, they taste, they smell. They're in the moment, they're cooking, and that cannot be learned from watching a cathode ray tube.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for a great discussion this evening. My question is directed to Richard. You talked about the locavore movement and how you'd like, or you identify more with trying to support local farmers and local food producers. Start with a statement first and then get your thoughts on it. The reality in the world today is that 7 billion people need to be fed, and they're demanding to be fed cheaply, reliably, safely and regularly. How do we do that if we break down the global food production system and the trading system the way that we know it now, and the way in which the course and the trajectory of history has brought us to this
probably going to have to
situation now?
Get it into a bite.
Yeah, so your thoughts on how we can do that cheaply, safely, regularly, reliably, if we move to a locavore type food system?
We want to create order on chaos always, and having a capitalist way of thinking about the food ways is always going to have a centralised way of thinking, of having centralised bodies and be able to having people in control and distribution centres. Food transport, communication and dispersal has always been about geographic routes through riverways, estuaries, held in food, along coastlines, around mountain bowls and mountains, etc. It's been determined by geography. Without oil, we don't have. Without oil, we won't have a way of doing that anymore, and having controlled chaotic ways where there's a neoliberal market where actually you're taking out all these false providers of subsidies of cheap fuel, food distribution then finds a natural way of moving again. But when you take out fuel and you take out subsidies, it means something really bad's gone at the same time. Yeah, it's pretty stuffed.
So, lady up the front.
Yeah, I was just wondering if our obsession with food is making it so much more expensive, not only for us here in Australia. I've just moved back from living in Laos and find it ridiculously expensive in this country to eat, even the basics. But not only for us here in Australia, but also for people, for the farmer that's getting the 2 cents, it's becoming more expensive for them to eat in their own countries because it's all being shipped to us in our strive for having gourmet food.
I don't know if the food prices are going through the roof, literally, on a global basis. The last big spike was in 2008, and we're now at the same point. I don't think it's the obsession with food is the driver of those food price increases. It's things like biofuels, it's things like the drought in the US. Those sorts of, they're the main drivers of the increases in food prices, at least of the staples of things like soybeans and the like. Consequences of that, those food prices going up, are going to be more people going hungry, and it's going to be social instability. There was a study done of looking at what happened in 2008 when the food prices went through the roof last time, and there were food price riots, I think it was something like 30 or 40 countries. It's been one suggestion, the Arab Spring, one of the main drivers of the Arab Spring was the massive increases in food price. So I think I don't think it's the obsession driving those increases in food, but the consequences are going to be pretty severe, and they're happening right now.
It's also, your class, what you eat. We know this all over the world in rich nations and poor ones, that your class in a way is revealed by what you eat. It's the wealthy that can afford fresh, wholesome, organic kind of food, and that people with not enough money or less money eating junk food, solly food. We know that in Australia as much as in every other country. It's a big determinant of what you eat will reflect, not for everyone, of course, but to a large extent.
Peasants have a pretty good diet. Peasants.
Well, yeah, but then we fetishize it with our, we go and charge $30 for a bowl of risotto that used to be peasant food. The language around it too. We eat babies now, everything baby, peas baby, carrots baby, this baby, that. We let food sit, we let it rest, it's dead. It's a very peculiar language. The peasant diet is generally, because the peasant, if you look at the etymology of that, it's the people of the land, and the sometimes indigenous people, sometimes transplanted people, but they are of the land, and they do tend to have a pretty good diet. They tend not to have pretty good health because they don't have modern healthcare. Sometimes the sewage is really bad, the water's really bad, and if you want to go and keep in contact with them, it's really hard because they don't have a telephone, they don't have internet, they don't have a postal service. The hospital's 150 kilometres away. We can fantasise about it and imagine it and be romantic about it, but that diet of really hard living when it works and the seasons are good is a pretty good nutritional diet, and it is pretty sustainable. And so, and we are, yes, and there is a way we do try and get back to that. And we do try and hark back to that in a lot of cooking, even more so. If we look at the top
top level of cooking, the world's best restaurant, Noma, in Copenhagen, on the diet, on the menu tonight, a couple of hours down the track, will be ants, because they think that eating ants is de rigueur. It is the height of culture at present. At the same time, there are people in subsistence countries and peasant diets who are eating grasshoppers and bugs, etc., because it's what they need to get protein. Because you don't kill a chook because it lays its eggs. There in that one example shows that that's that tension, that dichotomy, and just that is that obscene or is that art, and is that beautiful? I don't know.
Oh, look, we might have to leave it there with that quite deep question from Richard. Thank you. And our time is up ever so quickly. I did read a book that's out at the moment, Stephen Poole's You Aren't What You Eat, as part of my research for tonight, that I must mention because it did inform me so much. I think it's Scribe books, but I also wanted to. There is, when I was researching this, that there's quite a lot of literature starting to pop up on this topic. And
can I mention one book?
Of course.
It's a novel. Wayne Macaulay, the local Melbourne author, cook. It's a absolutely masterful satire on what's happening in our world. It's really worth reading. Cook. Easy to remember.
All right. Look, thank you, everybody, for coming tonight, and please thank our guests.